For decades, Venezuela's oil was a symbol of wasted potential. Now it has become something else entirely, a lever of American power. Just 11 days after Nicolas Maduro was removed, the United States approved its first sale of Venezuelan oil, a deal worth $500 million. The oil was sold, the money was made, but the cash did not go back to Caracas. It went into accounts controlled by Washington, with the key accounts sitting quietly in Qatar. This is not a sanctions story. This is not a regime change story. This is something far more unusual. For the first time in modern history, the United States is not just influencing another country's resources. It is marketing them, selling them, and deciding when, how, and to whom the money flows back. If you want to understand how power works in the 21st century, stay with me. This story matters, because what looks like an oil deal is actually a blueprint. And to see that blueprint clearly, we need to step back and define the real problem this arrangement is trying to solve. At the center of this deal is a dilemma the United States did not choose, but now owns. Venezuela is rich in oil and poor in everything else. Its infrastructure is broken, its economy hollowed out, and its debts, nearly $170 billion, hang over every barrel like a legal minefield. Any dollar sent directly to Caracas risks being seized by creditors, oil companies, or courts across multiple jurisdictions. So the question was never whether Venezuela could sell oil. It was who could touch the money. American companies were wary. Banks were nervous. Rebuilding required capital, but capital required protection. That is the problem this arrangement is designed to manage. By controlling the sales and holding the proceeds, the US inserts itself between Venezuela's resources and the global legal system. Sanctions become leverage, accounts become choke points, and interim cooperation becomes the price of access. This is governance without sovereignty, control without formal ownership. And to understand how we arrived at a moment like this, we need to look backward, not at personalities, but at patterns that repeat across economic history. This moment did not begin with Venezuela, and it did not begin with Trump. It began with a recurring problem in global economics. What happens when a state collapses financially, but its assets remain valuable? We have seen versions of this before. Oil revenues from Iran once sat in foreign banks, monitored, licensed, and rationed. The logic was simple. Money could move, but only within rules set elsewhere. What is different now is scale and explicitness. Venezuela's oil is not just constrained. It is being actively managed by another government. Decades of misrule hollowed out the country's institutions. Debt piled up. Courts became weapons for creditors. By the time Maduro fell, the system was already unworkable. Any attempt to return to normal would have triggered lawsuits, seizures, and paralysis. So the administration reached for a familiar tool, but pushed it further. Not sanctions alone, not aid alone, but custodianship. Oil cycles have always produced power shifts. Those who control extraction rarely control pricing. Those who control pricing rarely control revenue. Here, all three converge, and when they do, history suggests the consequences rarely stay contained. Which brings us to the first real stress test of this new system. The stress test came quickly. The moment the first $500 million sale went through, the legal clock started ticking. Creditors noticed, lawmakers asked questions, and the administration moved to lock the door. An executive order followed, designed to block courts and claimants from touching the revenue. The money would not pass through Caracas. It would not sit in vulnerable institutions. Instead, it would be held under American control, with a significant portion placed in Qatar, chosen precisely because it was out of reach. This was not symbolism, it was defense. Inside Washington, officials framed it as necessity. Without protection, The entire arrangement would collapse under lawsuits. Outside Washington, critics saw something else: a president creating offshore accounts tied to assets seized after military action. Elizabeth Warren called it the kind of move a corrupt politician would be attracted to. Others warned Congress would inevitably intervene. But the deal held. Chevron signaled expansion. The interim leadership in Venezuela cooperated, and the system did not break. That is what made this moment dangerous and powerful. Because once a system survives its first crisis, it stops being an exception. It starts becoming a model. And the real question now is not legality. It is what kind of system this actually is. What is emerging here is not chaos. It is design. The United States is not governing Venezuela directly. It is governing the incentives around Venezuela. By holding the money, Washington controls time, access, and survival. Cooperation is rewarded, resistance is starved, and sanctions become adjustable dials rather than blunt weapons. This is why the Treasury insists it is just the banker. Bankers do not decide policy. They decide who gets liquidity and when. In a fragile system, that distinction disappears. Qatar's role is revealing. Not an ally, not an adversary, a financial neutral zone, a place where money can sit without being seized, but also without being free. The funds are not frozen, they are conditional. This is power without annexation, influence without occupation, and it creates a new kind of dependency. Venezuelan authorities may govern day-to-day life, but strategic decisions now run through accounts they do not control. The country's most valuable resource has become a lever held elsewhere. History tells us systems like this invite pressure, corruption, shortcuts, back channels, which is exactly what the next crisis exposes, not in theory, but in human behavior. The second crisis is quieter and far more dangerous. It does not come from courts or Congress. It comes from inside the system. When money is released in stages, someone decides what counts as legitimate need. A request arrives: wheat, fuel, medicine. A supplier appears. On paper, everything looks clean. In practice, this is where corruption lives. Veterans of past sanctions regimes recognize the pattern immediately. Shell companies, inflated contracts, kickbacks routed through intermediaries. The deal may say food for the people, but the margin slips elsewhere. That is why banks matter more than politicians here. The wrong bank looks away. The right bank asks uncomfortable questions. And every question slows the flow of money. This is why financial institutions hesitate. Whoever holds these accounts inherits scrutiny from Congress, subpoenas, and endless oversight. As one expert put it, this account is a headache waiting to happen. But the system moves forward anyway, because the alternative is paralysis. And while officials debate compliance frameworks and monitoring tools, the impact of this arrangement is already being felt far from boardrooms and bank vaults. It is being felt by people who have no access to the accounts, but live with the consequences every day. For you, this is not an abstract debate. You are not arguing about offshore accounts or executive orders. You are standing in a country where oil is flowing again, but control is distant. Prices still hurt, jobs are still scarce, and the promise of recovery feels conditional, fragile, reversible. You hear that money is being held for the people, but you do not see it. You wait for it. Every delay has a human cost. Hospitals wait. Power grids wait. Families who fled wait to see if returning is even possible. And every decision made in Washington or Doha stretches that waiting a little longer. This is the paradox of custodianship: stability without dignity, order without ownership. The administration says the funds will come back, that Treasury is only the banker, that this is temporary. But temporary systems have a way of hardening into structures. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The system works precisely because you have no veto. Leverage only exists when someone else bears the uncertainty. If this feels personal, it should. Because the next question is not about Venezuela alone. It is about what happens when this model leaves one country and starts reshaping the world beyond it. What is happening in Venezuela does not stay in Venezuela. The moment the United States began marketing another country's oil and holding the proceeds, capitals around the world took note. Allies saw a powerful tool. Rivals saw a warning. Fragile states saw a future they might not control. This is geoeconomics at full throttle. Control the revenue, and you do not need to control the territory. You can influence elections without endorsing candidates, shape behavior without signing treaties, all while operating inside the language of finance, not force. Qatar's quiet role matters here. It signals that power now flows through networks, not blocks. Money can sit in places that are politically neutral, but strategically essential. That flexibility makes the model exportable, and others are already thinking about it. What happens to energy states with debt distress, to post-conflict countries with valuable resources, to rivals whose assets move through systems the US can still reach? Once a mechanism works, it spreads. Which brings us to the hardest question of all. Where does this road lead, and how does it end? There are three futures embedded in this moment, and none of them are abstract. In the best case, custodianship fades. The system stabilizes Venezuela's finances, elections follow, institutions recover, and control over oil revenues gradually returns. The mechanism dissolves because it succeeds. In the middle case, the system endures. Oil flows, money moves slowly, oversight becomes permanent. Venezuela regains function, but not full autonomy. Stability arrives at the price of dependence. And in the worst case, this becomes precedent, not just for Venezuela, but for others. Resource-rich states learn that collapse means external control. Great powers learn that managing assets is easier than rebuilding nations. Finance replaces diplomacy. History suggests systems choose efficiency over morality. What begins as temporary often becomes structural. What begins as rescue can harden into rule. The question then is not whether this works, it is what kind of world it normalizes. Because once power learns it can govern through accounts and licenses, not borders and armies, it rarely forgets. And that brings us to the final insight, the part we tend to avoid because it implicates all of us. This is not a story about oil. It is a story about how power has changed. In the past, control meant flags, soldiers, and borders. Today, it means accounts, licenses, and approvals. Whoever controls the flow of money controls the range of choices, quietly, legally, and often invisibly. The Venezuelan deal reveals something uncomfortable. The future of global order may be administered, not governed, managed, not debated, and justified not by ideology, but by efficiency. That should make you pause, because if this model works here, it will be used elsewhere, and the line between help and control will grow thinner every time. The real danger is not corruption or backlash, it is normalization. So the next time you hear about sanctions, frozen assets, or temporary arrangements, look deeper. Ask who holds the account. Ask who decides the timing. Ask who waits and who never has to. If this analysis helped you see the system more clearly, share it. These conversations shape what comes next. And if you want to understand where this model is heading and who may be next, stay with me.